moving on, we got a big card this weekend. It is a big pivotal lightweight bout, and I know you don't like talking about Conor McGregor, Miguel, but I think that this is the fight actually for the Conor McGregor sweepstakes. We talked about earlier this year that Cowboy Cerrone, there was a lot of talk about a potential bout between him and McGregor, and now there's a lot of talk about Gaethje. Here you got the number 4 and number 5 ranked lightweights going to war in a headlining bout this Saturday. This fight will be in British Columbia, Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and it'll be at 155 pounds, as I mentioned. Big bout here between these two. And also on
my old hometown of Vancouver. I lived there for a couple of years, and it was pre-UFC days back then, but they've hosted the UFC a couple of times. It's not one of their frontline venues, so I think, it's a card where if they have the two main event guys and then the rest of the card kind of humdrum, The two main event guys, I think you're right. They're probably playing for that sweepstakes, and I think, rankings aside, Gaethje's been on his way up. Cowboy, is back on his way down a little bit after this loss and stuff. But you can still name, with Khabib and Poirier and guys above these guys and stuff like that. So yeah, I think what that does is he comfortably sets McGregor up to start tumbling in the rankings. And I think, McGregor, the fact is I would consider against any of these guys that he's going to have to be probably the underdog. I don't know if I'd favor him against any of the other top 5.
See, this might upset you a little bit, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I obviously would definitely favor Khabib. Khabib's going to be a hard one for anybody to beat. I would favor Tony Ferguson in a 5-round fight. A 3-round fight, I think, could be a little closer just because Tony does tend to get hit early before he really starts wearing people down with pressure. Same with Nate Diaz, but in 5-round bouts, I would pick both Tony and Nate over Conor at this point. I don't know what we're going to get when we get Conor back because all the images indicate that Conor's in great shape. And when in his interview with Ariel Helwani, he talked about that he's been training, says he broke his hand. He planned on coming back in August. I don't know if all that's just smoke and mirrors and they didn't have the right opponent for the right time. When it comes to these two, I could see Conor taking on either one of these fights because if there's one thing about Justin Gaethje, for example, Justin Gaethje gets hit. If there's one big criticism about him, it's that he takes a lot of damage. And that was the big criticism when he first came into the sport. Michael Johnson was lighting him up in his debut. And he came back and won that bout, and Eddie Alvarez was lighting him up. And I would signal toward the Eddie Alvarez fight that he got knocked out in. It was a great fight as an indication that Conor might be a step ahead of somebody like Justin Gaethje and Donald Cerrone. And I think Justin Gaethje is going to win this fight as much as I love Donald Cerrone. But so I think that we might be seeing Justin versus Conor. I think Conor will take that fight. I think Conor will be the taller, a little bit longer reach, a little bit quicker and sharper of a striker in that fight. But man, if he's not able to get Gaethje out of there early and it starts to fade, Gaethje will finish him. And I think that's the end of Conor's career if that happens. And same with Cowboy, really. If he's unable to get Cowboy out of there and Cowboy is able to weather the storm and gets Conor out of there at that point, can Conor recover from losing a bout to one of these two?
Yeah, I think he's in a dangerous situation. I think any loss next is a bad mark to him. I think he can maybe justify or survive another loss to Khabib, which may be why he's pushing for that rematch so much. But anybody else, with all the talk, all the bluster, all the zeros on his paychecks and stuff, it's not unfair to ask him to beat any of the other guys there, and we'll see if he's up to it.
I agree. Looking at the rest of this card a little bit, you got, as I mentioned, Donald Cerrone and Justin Gaethje topping the card. You got Glover Teixeira coming back. He's coming off his big win over Ian Kuchalaba, who was really brought in as a young contender to beat him and make a name off him. And they're kind of doing the same thing here with Nikita Krylov. They're bringing in Nikita Krylov, who's a very tough, very solid fighter. Nikita Krylov, he's coming off a win over OSP. And he's 27 years old. His only loss in his last 7 fights was to Jan Blachowicz. So they're kind of bringing Glover in, and there's, like you mentioned, there's really not a whole lot to talk about on this card. You have the return of Todd Duffy. You've got a bout between top ranked middleweights between Antonio Carlos Jr. and Uriah Hall. You got Misha Serkinov coming back, taking on an undefeated young, like 22-year-old kid, Jimmy Crute. But other than really those top two fights, there's not a whole lot to talk about on this card. I do want to. I think it'd be disrespectful to say something, not say anything about Glover though, because I do want to bring that up before we sign off, because we talked a little bit about that going into the Ian Cutelaba fight. I remember, and then we talked a lot about how great it was to see him go out there and get the win, because they kind of have been angling Glover to be a gatekeeper, and Glover's kind of shutting people down. And I think if he keeps this up, he might come back to contendership at such a weak division at light heavyweight. There's nobody there. If he wins this, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to seeing him fight Blachowicz or Anthony Smith or any of those guys. I think he could hang with them.
Yeah, and he's adapted himself pretty well. As he's aged, he went from being a total slugger who didn't really care, about taking damage in order to dish his out, and being a feared guy running that style, to now fighting a little bit more of what I would term a cerebral style, a smart style, where he'll get the takedown and you give him the takedown, and then he'll work from there. He'll take a submission if you give it to him. He's added facets to his game, so I would not be averse to seeing him get an Anthony Smith or someone like that on the way for his next fight. I think that could be very interesting, actually.
Well, I think the UFC really just gave up on Glover because of how bad he was just battered by Alexander Gustafsson. But that was Gustafsson's best performance that he ever had, other than the first Jones bout. And Gus really just went in there and put a clinic on Glover, knocked him out in the 5th round with those nice uppercuts. And ever since then, they just really have got out of the Glover Teixeira market, apparently. And I don't know why. I mean, he's always been a very solid fighter. I mean, he came up, was on a great run, ended up fighting for the title. I'm looking at his resume right now. I mean, he's got 2 wins in a row right now. He did lose to Corey Anderson, but he's finished Misha Serkinov, Carl Robertson, and Ian Cutelaba 3 out of his last 4. And other than that, his only losses were he did have the quick, just like 6-second, just flattening from Anthony Johnson that I do remember. That was a sad performance. But his only losses in the past decade were the John Jones and Phil Davis decisions, the knockout to Johnson, Gus, and the decision loss to Corey Anderson. I mean, these are top-level guys that he's lost to. And as you mentioned, he's really kind of revamped his game. He looks really good. He looks like he understands where.
And it's a smarter game, too. He's not taking damage as much, and I think that's, a critical jump to make, because if you still think, yeah, I'm just going to come forward and stuff like that, it's better to be protective of yourself in the B side of your career. You can let fly, I think, when you're younger, and he did. And I think he's showing progress in my book, getting out of that habit, just giving him some credit.
I totally agree. But this has been a CRP News Roundup for September 11th, 2019. Miguel, it was good talking to you. We covered all the high points. Maybe we can get back either late Friday night or early Saturday morning to recap whatever else falls down the pipe in the world of MMA.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Definitely good to have you set back up in this way, and hopefully we'll be bringing a lot more dual commentaries here on the UFC and more. Please hit like and subscribe. I'm Miguel Dorati, and that there is Devin Miller, and this has been the CRP Moment. Thanks.